Here we go in five, four, three, two, one.
Welcome to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. KC Cares is the intersection of the nonprofit and profit communities, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. KC Cares is proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. I'm Ruth Baum Biggis. The Kansas City Library, with its 10 locations, is a place to explore, learn, and experience. But the past 14 months has been like no other for the system and its thousands of patrons. The pandemic forced closures, canceled programs, and lots of other changes. Now things are changing for the better. And to learn what's new, we have the new director of the library, John Herron, the executive director. Welcome to KC Cares.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Ruth.
It's great to have you. Well, we should let our audience know you're new, but it's almost been a year
Yeah,
since you
I
came on board.
started, I can't remember the exact date. I believe it was right around the 4th of July. So I am month 10 or 11, almost on my 1-year anniversary.
Well, we should congratulate you. Anybody who comes on in the middle of a pandemic and has to deal with all the assets that you do at the library, that's pretty amazing to have done that.
Yeah, bad career choices, changing careers during the middle of a pandemic. It's not something I would recommend again, quite honestly.
Well, can you share with us a little bit your journey to the library?
So yeah, thank you. And this will, it's a little bit of an extended story. So if it gets too much, cut me off or direct me someplace else. But I'm so new to the library, but not new to Kansas City. So I'm not a Kansas City native, but I've lived here for quite some time. This is year 17 or 18 for me in Kansas City. My background is in higher education. So what brought us to Kansas City was UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, where I was a faculty member and then an administrator for several years. So over the course of my time in Kansas City, I got to know the library pretty well. I had been a participant in several library events. I had watched the library grow and expand. I was aware of and knew my predecessor, Crosby Kemper. So one of the things that I loved about UMKC was that it's a university that's committed to the community. It's very much engaged in community outreach and community activities. And when the library called and said, "Hey, we've got an opportunity," for me, it felt in many ways like a natural transition where I could continue to do the things that I care about most, and that's work with the Kansas City community in all kinds of different ways. It seemed like it was a natural fit. So I am very excited to be here. It was perhaps a little difficult to leave my old world behind, not just because it was the middle of the pandemic, but I'd been in higher education in one form or another since the mid-90s, taught at a number of different universities around the country before coming to Kansas City. But it's a decision that I do not regret. I'm very happy with the library and our extended team and all the work we do in and around the city.
Well, they're lucky to have you. Share with us what subject matter was your expertise, although you said you then migrated to administration.
Yeah, so I'm trained as an American historian. So my PhD is in 19th century American history. So I'm an American, I describe myself as an American social and cultural historian. And within that, I have two different research areas. One is the Trans-Mississippi West, so the American West. But my primary research field is what's called environmental history, environmental studies. So how did and does the physical world impact American life and culture? So those are my research areas. My previous my previous university stops included a teaching position in Massachusetts, one in Southern California, before coming to Kansas City.
Wow, you've been all over the country, so you could share that expertise.
Right. Yeah. However, with a couple other, I'm not a native of any of those locations. I actually grew up in a small town in Montana, tucked up right next to the Canadian border. So I know the Rocky Mountain West and the Pacific Northwest. I was educated in the American Southwest, and then spent time on both coasts. So I've got a pretty good coverage.
What a robust background to bring to a library. I think many people may think of looking into history and other subject matter when they go to the library. But I don't want to take us off too far on a tangent. I'm a history buff too, so it just sounds
We
so
can talk about that
interesting.
we can talk about that for as long as you wish. So I also obviously have a great affection and commitment to history and the humanities generally.
Well, you mentioned it was hard for you to give up, quote, that old life.
Mhm.
What was it about that? And have you been able to bring any of that into your leadership at the library?
So this is a little bit of inside baseball, and I apologize for this, but higher ed and academia in general is a career choice that is very much an identity profession. So people who are faculty in higher education institutions identify with that career in a way that perhaps is not maybe it's not as intense as some other career choices. So you very much take a personal kind of you wear it in a very personal way, perhaps more than you would choose some other professions. So it is in part because it's a constant part of your life. There is when you're in higher education, there's not a the clock doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. So you're constantly thinking about new projects or new things that you're working on, and the real my evenings, my mornings, my weekends, my summers were always spent pursuing different interests. So it's very much an all-encompassing profession, and for most people that's a very good positive, right? It's a kind of a left-handed compliment / cliche. Academics have social capital without economic capital, and and to be a faculty member is to leave that world was I think is difficult for anybody. I had taken a very traditional academic path, right? So when I came to Kansas City, it was as an untenured assistant professor. And then I sort of went up the regular academic ranks and then moved into increasingly more complicated and complex administrative roles. My most recent university position was as a dean in the College of Arts and Sciences. So a fairly complicated, complex unit, which I loved. So it wasn't as if I was leaving university life because I was unhappy or distressed, but the opportunity to do the best parts of the academic world, one-on-one engagement with the community on all different kinds of levels was just too good to pass up.
So you get to keep the people part.
Yeah.
And you get to be around a lot of books.
Well, I get to keep the intellectual engagement part. This is maybe once again a truism of the modern public library. And I say this with some reservation because I don't want it to sound exactly in the way it comes off, but libraries are not really in the book business. Libraries are in the community business. We are a service center. And so how we spend most of our time is thinking about new and interesting ways in which we could serve the community. And so our value proposition is one in which we have to ask ourselves, after every program or every initiative that we're trying to do or create or support, is how does this serve the community? Does this activity that the library is promoting, does this make the community more equitable, more sustainable, more balanced? So I think it's very easy to come into our spaces and be awed by the architecture or to get lost in a sea of books that are just like, oh, this is great. I'm going to go into this little corner and I'm just going to surround myself in these artifacts that I just love so much. But it's also important to remember that our true purpose is to be to serve the community, and we do that in a whole host of expected and unexpected ways.
Share with us a little bit of the expected and the unexpected.
Okay. Well, the expected is going to come in the forms that we would all recognize. So we are very engaged in K through 12 education and literacy. So how we can use our collections as a tool to improve educational outcomes in the city, we're all for. We also use our collections to do, once again, and I'll just keep using the word expected, whether this is, adult book groups, whether this is anything that we could do that would be around building a community of readers, we're in favor of. But once again, I think that's what the community would expect a library to do. I think the list of unexpected things is much more extensive. So some of this became crystal clear during the pandemic. We pivoted much of our services and activities into an online or digital framework. But we were involved in, health programs. So if, we did, blood testing, we did COVID testing, we've done mental health services. We have many social workers who are, on staff of the library, and we use our outreach efforts to look at the various health elements in our community. We became a very popular site during the pandemic for one of our community partners, Harvesters, to help feed Kansas City school children. So when schools are going remote, if we could step in and help Harvesters get access to the community so that school children in need had access to nutrition, then we were going to do so. We have invested a great many resources in what's called the digital divide or digital equity. So if you would have, driven around our community libraries, not long after the city, went into lockdown, so March, April, you would have seen that, like the rest of the community, our physical branches were shuttered, but very often our parking lots were full. And that's because people were coming to our spaces, our outdoor spaces, because they needed access to our Wi-Fi. So what that put in a stark relief is just how digital access, access to variable information streams is in fact one of the signature problems of equity in Kansas City. So with our CARES dollars, our federal CARES dollars, we invested heavily in, simple infrastructure, tablets, hotspots, to make sure that the patrons of our district would have access to all things online. So whether that was making sure that, your fourth grade son got access to, his, virtual school, or whether that meant you could have access to apply for federal benefits, or, we maintain many of our other traditional services. So we have somebody on our team that helps, people who are looking for a job and they need resume help. We have somebody on our team who helps people who want to start a business, an entrepreneurship, team. Like those activities continued and in many ways even accelerated during the pandemic. So I think maybe to an informed resident of the city, I think they're probably aware that the library does some of that stuff. I don't think the depth of those activities are very well understood. I certainly didn't know. I mean, I was an informed person. I was aware of the library and had participated in the library. I don't think even I understood the level of investment, commitment, and presence that the library has as a key social service provider for the city.
That's an interesting perspective. I don't know that many people would first think about social service and that kind of thing. And oh, that's the library.
Yeah.
How?
That was
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, I think that sort of, I don't think that's even you, that's not only an external position. I think even some of us inside the library are sometimes unaware of the depth of our coverage. You will hear the Kansas City Public Library often described as a hidden gem of the city, or a hidden jewel of the city. My staff has heard this so many times, they're probably getting a little tired of it, but I am perfectly fine with the library being described as a gem or a jewel. I am not happy with it being described as hidden. So one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that all those various levels of activity and labor, that it is much more, not in an aggressive way, but in a much more public way. Like we want to be everybody's first choice in a community partnership kind of way. So if there's other nonprofits, if there's other community engagement organizations that are out there, our goal would be, one of their first thoughts would to say like, oh, let's partner with the library on this initiative. Let's partner with the library on that initiative. So to me, that's one of the things that we're going to try to double down on as we move forward.
Well, the library is quote unquote back open for business. Yay.
Correct. Yep, finally.
What does that mean though? There are still some guidelines, still some rules that people will need to follow.
The one, kind of the biggest one, is that we as a leadership team made a commitment first to our staff and then to our patrons, that we would not resume normal services until we had or let's verbalize this a little bit better. Our priority was the health and safety of our staff and our patrons, right? Full stop. So one thing that we're keeping in place, even though the city is not, is the mask mandate. And I know this is going to cause some people some concern, but one of the primary reasons is that we have many people who use our spaces who do not yet have access to the vaccine. So that includes children in particular, right? So any visitor to any one of our branches is going to be noted by the large number of children who visit our spaces. Until that population can be protected, we would like to continue the mask mandate. Now, we will always follow what the Kansas City health professionals are recommending to us. We'll closely track the case counts. But I think in the opening months of our reopening, we're going to continue to protect those children by asking our patrons to stay masked up. We also are going to wait a little while until we resume our large, in-person programming inside. So one of the wonderful things that the library is known for, and perhaps best known for, is what we call our signature public programming. So that's either an evening event at the downtown library or an evening event at the Plaza branch of the library. You could sit in the Truman room in the Plaza with 300 of your neighbors. Those events are still going to be digital until we get to a point where we feel like that's a safe thing to do for our staff and patrons. But other than that, we're not, our opening is not a scaled opening. It's like a little bit of this and then a little bit of that. It's like, no, it's like we're open, right? So we encourage the community to come into our spaces and to use them as they used the library before.
Well, I know people will look forward to coming back for those great events, as you mentioned, like in the Truman Room, and just being able to gather together, I think has been such an element for many people that they've missed. And even if we could gather with masks, that was even better than just not gathering. Mm-hmm. You carried on some of that programming during the pandemic.
We did.
How did you go about that? That's not an easy thing to, quote unquote, entertain and engage people. I know for ourselves with our audience, we've tried to, find that balance instead of just two talking heads.
When I have to give credit to the leadership team that predated me, because if the shutdown was in March and I arrived in July, like some of this labor had already been done. the quick pivot to online and digital was a remarkable achievement of the library. So some of it was because the library had already begun to move into that space and move into those directions. So there's a robust information systems team here. There's a robust, what we call digital branch, digital projects team. But very, very quickly, what would have been a gathering in Hellsberg Hall or the Truman Room or Kirk Hall became an online event. And I think with the expected sort of fits and starts that was not unique to us, but was unique to every organization that was doing this pivot, there was a learning curve, but very, very quickly, the public affairs team here was able to move its entire public programming structure online. And in many ways, it enabled us to expand the list of people who would be willing to come and speak at the Kansas City Public Library, because we didn't have to, bring somebody out from, New York for 36 hours in Kansas City. They too could be in their home or in their office, and yet we could get this very large, very well-known speaker, intellectual, politician who'd be willing to come. So I'm very proud of the work that those extended teams did to make sure that we were offering our signature public programming in a digital way. And also, what we've discovered is the obvious. So in a traditional pre-pandemic world, and we'd get 300 people to come to an event, now we get 300 people who watch it live, but then several hundreds, if not thousands more, who will go to our YouTube channel or our Facebook page and watch that event, on their own time. So it's enabled us to extend our reach. It's enabled us to build a catalog of programs and performances that we can then rely on for our patrons to use at a later date. So in many ways, it's enabled us to build a little bit more connective tissue between our various public programs, and their life has been extended, their reach has been extended. So it's been an unintended consequence, but very much a positive one.
You used one of the P words, as I say. It's pandemic positive and pandemic pivots.
Yeah.
What else in this period of time were you able, you pivoted, but what are those things that now, as we're emerging in this post-pandemic world, that you think will stick with the library? You mentioned that maybe you will keep virtual programs after you really are able to open fully for those kinds of things. Other things that you can share with us?
Yeah, so this is going to sound like we are a restaurant offering takeout, but one of the more successful programs we did was we very quickly moved to, in essence, curbside service, pop in and pick up. So you could engage the library, you could identify, the books and materials that you wanted available for checkout. And as if you were ordering takeout food for your family, you could come to the library and you could pick that up, prepackaged. This has proved to be extraordinarily popular. My guess is it will continue in some form. Now, we probably don't have the staffing to continue it in the exact same form that we do, but my guess is some form of pop in and pick up, some form of curbside service will continue. I think as much as people want to have the fellowship of being in the same space, listening to our signature public programming. So I do think that we are, as soon as we can go back to in-person events, we will, but my guess is those events will also be streamed, right? That there'll be a digital record of that event as much as there will be an in-person event. I think there's nothing that can replace that experience of coming into and being face-to-face with like-minded citizens, with the presenter. There is something about the in-person world that probably can't be perfectly replicated. But what we've seen is the many people who have transportation issues, the many people who, for various childcare reasons, health reasons, you name the long list, they now can be a much more active part of our community. once again, this is an equity issue. I think the pandemic has put into relief how very different the impact of of COVID was throughout the various sectors of our population. And we've discovered lots of people who say, God, I would have, I always wanted to attend and I was never able to attend because of these, sometimes challenges, sometimes choices. Well, now if we eliminate those barriers, we are just making our community that much more rich, that much more large, that much more engaged. So I think what we're going to try to figure out is, what goes away, what stays, and how can we continue to expand our reach? All things digital is a key part of this.
Well, that community connectivity.
Yeah.
We had started our conversation about the importance of the library being seen as that community place. I know when Bobby and I used to come down once a month, and we hope we'll be able to return to that. It was always fun to see who was there. It was such a cross section of community. It wasn't any one ethnicity, color, sex, age. It was just all of those things. You'd see the 5-year-old kid coming from the book reading and checking out with the senior citizen who, had come in for that favorite novel or whatever that they wanted to be able to read.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, that is a beautiful thing. Libraries, sociologists call this the third space, kind of the classical third space. A place that's not home, a place that's not work. It's this third space. I think now that even that definition is probably a little limiting. I think libraries are more than that third space. I like that idea. I mean, again, my whole career, I would gravitate to a library because, again, it wasn't my office or it wasn't my home, and it was, I would change locations and get a fresh perspective on my work. It's much the same way that people are like, okay, I'm gonna go to the coffee shop to get some work done. So libraries have always been that, but I think that does a disservice to portray or describe libraries only in that way, because there are so few places in our community where you can go, you don't need to buy anything, you don't need to show an ID, you are not going to be asked to leave your table after 45 minutes. So we truly are one of the few safe havens in our community. So when you're talking about the divergent nature of our visitors, the downtown libraries is a perfect microcosm of that. There will be people who use our space as a warming or cooling center, right? And it's a reminder that there are members of our community who just do not have access to safe spaces. And if only to come in for an hour, maybe they want to, get access to a restroom, right? A simple act like that. Well, we're going to provide that, and we're going to provide that without judgment, right? And we're going to provide that without cost, without obstacle, without obligation. So you can come to our spaces, and whether you are, it doesn't matter what position you are in the economic spectrum. First of all, you're going to be welcome, and second of all, you're going to find something of utility to you. And we have, whether you're an after-school teen looking for a program of some kind, whether you are a new arrival in this country and you need English classes and you're trying to prepare for the citizenship exam, whether you are a child who has adult care responsibilities, like we have a very interesting and dynamic memory care program for adults, whether you're getting your very first book. Again, we have a books to give program where if you are, a parent who's helping their child build their first library, like you come to us and we'll make sure that a child gets their very first book and they get it from us.
And folks, we should say, our audience, if you want to know about all of that and more, you can visit the library's website, which is kclibrary.org. It's a plethora of information. And John, we're so grateful that you were able to spend this time with us and share your journey and the view of what the library is and does and will continue to do. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you for listening to Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications, and we're proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. If you'd like to be a guest on Casey Cares or underwriting opportunities, check out our website at caseycaresonline.org and spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio and on Instagram at Casey Cares Online. And catch us on ESPN 1510 AM and 94.5 FM Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Thank you for joining us at Casey Cares.